freshman in college, freshly out of my small town, and completely naive. Up until that point, I had never had a boyfriend, never kissed a guy, never even gone on a real date. My friends teased me about it constantly, and I was tired of being the virgin of the group, so I finally caved and made a Tinder account. I matched with this guy. Let's call him Jake. He was decent looking, a little older, and seemed normal enough. We chatted for a week before making plans to meet up. Dinner and a movie, a basic first date. And I was nervous but excited. The date itself, completely unremarkable. I don't remember much about the conversation, and there were no major red flags. He was polite, not overly flirty, and honestly, kind of boring. I figured at worst, it was just an underwhelming date. But after the movie, things changed. It was past 11 p.m., and he was driving me home. I was zoning out, tired, when I realized something felt off. I looked out the window and saw nothing but open fields. No streetlights, no familiar landmarks, just darkness and gravel. "Where are we?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, I'm just taking some back roads," he said, not looking at me. I felt my stomach tighten. I knew the general layout of the area, and there was no reason to be this far out. "How much longer?" I asked. "Not long," he said. Then, completely out of nowhere, he added, "Mind if I turn on my police scanner?" I blinked. "What?" "I like listening to it," he said. "You can hear all kinds of crazy stuff." At this point, I was starting to panic. Who listens to a police scanner on a date? And why were we still in the middle of nowhere? Then he pulled over, just stopped the truck on this empty gravel road, and turned off the headlights. Everything went black. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could barely see his face in the darkness. He turned to me, smiling. "So," he said, "what do you want to do now?" Every hair on my body stood up. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to act like I wasn't terrified. I tried to sound casual. "I think I just want to go home." He did not respond right away, just sat there, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. I felt trapped. My purse was at my feet, and I slowly reached down, trying not to make any sudden moves. I grabbed my phone and, thinking fast, pretended to answer a call. "Hey, Mom," I said loudly, making sure my voice was steady. "Yeah, I'm still with Jake. We're just heading back now. I should be home soon." I saw him tense up. I kept going. "Yeah, he's cool. We just saw a movie. I'll let you know when I'm home." Silence. Then, without a word, he reached for the ignition and turned the truck back on. He flipped the headlights and pulled back onto the road. I did not say anything. Neither did he. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to my dorm. I mumbled a quick thanks, got out, and walked inside without looking back. I never heard from him again. For years, I wondered if I had overreacted. Maybe he really was just taking back roads. Maybe he really did just like listening to police scanners. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I know I didn't. Something was off. and I don't want to think about what might have happened if I hadn't faked that phone call. 4 years later, I actually met my current boyfriend on Tinder. We've been together for a year and a half, and he's the best thing that's ever happened to me. There are good guys out there. You just have to weed through the dangerous ones first. I had a Tinder date once with a guy who lived just down the street from me. I always sent my roommates the address and had location services on. But looking back, it was still a dumb decision. He kept talking about his dog and asked me if I wanted to come over and meet it. And after a few days of texting, I agreed. His house was huge, with a boat parked out front. When I pulled up, he came running outside and told me to park diagonally next to the boat. There was barely an inch of space on either side of my car. At the time, it did not seem weird, but in retrospect, I think he was making sure I couldn't leave quickly. What he didn't know was that I lived close enough to run home if I had to. When he opened the door, he was wearing nothing but boxers. That should have been my cue to leave, but I didn't. Inside, the house was practically empty. Just 2 futons, no other furniture. It felt abandoned, like no one really lived there. We started talking, and he casually mentioned that he was pre-med. Then he started analyzing me, saying I seemed like someone with low self-esteem, probably a traumatic childhood. He wasn't wrong, but it felt off that he pinned me so quickly. Then I realized I hadn't seen his dog, and I asked about it. He just smiled and kept talking, shifting the conversation back to me. His questions started getting stranger. Did anyone know I was here? Was anyone expecting me later? What was my blood type? Where was my family from? Who did I live with? At that point, I started gripping my keys between my fingers, like I would in a dark parking lot. He kept checking his phone, looking nervous. Every instinct in me was screaming to get out, and I asked about the dog again. He smiled but didn't answer. I made up an excuse to leave. He insisted on walking me to the door, tried to kiss me, and I pulled away. He kept glancing at his phone and saying, "Just stay 5 more minutes." I don't know how, but I backed out of that impossible parking space in seconds. My hands were shaking, but I did not stop until I was home. The next day, he left me a voicemail asking me to go on a motorcycle ride into the mountains, but there's no cell service. I never replied. 2 weeks later, I saw 5 cop cars on the street. I never saw them move out, but the house sat empty for a long time. I never had the courage to look up what happened. About 2 weeks ago, I matched with this girl on Tinder. She was cool, easy to talk to, and we clicked pretty fast. She had a dark sense of humor, but I thought it was just her personality. She was attractive, had lots of tattoos, which I liked, and seemed outgoing. Nothing about her really stood out as strange at first. There were a few offhand comments she made that were a little morbid, but I chalked it up to her humor. The only thing that seemed a little odd was that she insisted on driving. I figured maybe she just liked being in control, or had a nice car she wanted to show off. When she pulled up though, it was not a nice car. It was an old, beat up, dark brown van. Not the worst thing in the world, but when I got inside, the smell hit me immediately. It was awful. The van was a mess. Trash everywhere, dirty clothes piled up, and the smell of something rotting. I did not want to be rude, so I just made casual conversation and tried to ignore it. Dinner was normal, no red flags beyond what I had already noticed. She was still fun to talk to, still charming, so I let my guard down. After we ate, she said she wanted to take me to the spot she liked, way out into the woods. I assumed it was some sort of make-out spot, and even though the idea of going deep into the woods at night with someone I barely knew felt a little sketchy, I went along with it. When we got there, she parked, got out, and before I could even react, she took off running. Full sprint, straight into the trees. I sat there for a second, confused as hell, trying to figure out if she was just messing with me, or if something was wrong. After a minute or two, I got out and called her name, but I couldn't see anything past the headlights. It was dead silent. Something about it felt really wrong. So I got back into the van and locked the doors. Maybe 5 minutes later, there was this loud, violent pounding on the windows. It scared the shit out of me. I looked out, and it was her. But she was completely naked. She had this huge grin on her face and just said, "I was trying to freak you out." Then she started laughing hysterically. I was so weirded out, but I did not want to overreact, so I just kind of played it off and let her back inside. She climbed in, started kissing me, but then she started asking me to do things that were uncomfortable. I don't want to go into detail, but it was weird. The more I hesitated, the more insistent she got. I finally told her I wasn't comfortable and that I wanted to go home. Her whole demeanor changed instantly. The playfulness disappeared, and she just stared at me for a second. Then, without saying a word, she reached across me, opened my door, and shoved me out. Before I could react, she slammed the door shut and sped off, leaving me there in the middle of nowhere. I still had my phone, so I called the cops. I wasn't even sure how to explain what had just happened, just that I'd been left alone in the woods and needed help getting back. A patrol car found me about 30 minutes later. I told them everything, and as I was talking to them, her van pulled up again. She got out and tried to act like nothing had happened. The cops started questioning her, and the more she talked, the stranger she sounded. She was calm but defensive, like she was annoyed they were even there. She said it was all a joke, that I had overreacted. The cops decided to take her in, at least for questioning. The next day, I woke up to a long, furious message from her. She tore into me for calling the cops, said I was weak, childish, and ruined what was supposed to be a fun night. She made it sound like everything she did was just a prank, that I should have found it funny, but nothing about it felt like a joke. I blocked her after that. The whole thing still sits weird with me. It wasn't just the van, the smell, or even the way she acted. It was how quickly she flipped. How 1 second she was laughing, and the next, she was completely cold. I still wonder what would have happened if I had gone along with everything, if I hadn't pushed back. Whatever her idea of fun was, I don't think I wanted to find out.